Hey, welcome to Vector Wonderland, the big Geometry Nodes course. In this final and last episode, we will make a whole Christmas tree with all of its extras, including fairy lights and candles on it. So, be excited, I'm excited, and let's hop into the last episode of Vector Wonderland. Vector Wonderland. Hey, welcome to the fourth and the last part of our big Vector Wonderland Geometry Nodes course. In this last episode, we will make a whole Christmas tree with inside of the Geometry Nodes system inside of Blender. For this, we want to start a Blender version or open a Blender version. And for this whole course, we use the 3.4 version, but now there's a 3.4.5, 0.1 stable release. So we, of course, want to use that because of all those bug fixes. And you can download it via the Blender launcher that I showed you, or you can download it via the Blender website, blender.org. Yes, here we are inside of Blender, and we want to, of course, delete everything. And we want to have our cube back. Now, how can we do such Christmas tree? So let me explain it a little bit. We want to have a center curve that's going up. We want to displace it, and then we want to instance a bunch of curves on it that are the branches. On those branches, we also want to instance more curves that are smaller branches. And on those smaller branches, we want to have all those needles. And then we want to have also fairy lights wrapped around it. And we want to, of course, have candles also. And this will be the whole tutorial. Let's hop into the Geometry Nodes editor here on the top. On the bottom, of course. So we want to create a new node tree. So if you haven't seen the past episodes, I recommend doing this. The past episodes will help you out. So you can watch this series here from episode 1. And then you will be up to date. So for creating our center curve, we don't want to have our cube. We want to have, so with Shift A, you can add new nodes. We've learned this in the first part. And here are the curve primitives, and we want to have a curve line. We of course want to see it and want to render it, so it goes into the group output. Here is now our curve line. So how tall is our tree? Maybe 6 meters. It's a weird tree, I know. And now we want to displace our curve a little bit. We can do this by first of all add resolution, because our basic curve line has only 2 points, the start and the end point. We need more points to displace it, so go into the curve submenu, and here is the resample curve node. We want to grab this, and right after this we want to have in the geometry submenu the set position node, because we want to change the position, or in other words, displace our curve. We want to displace it with a texture, a noise texture, not a mask grave, although it also works. We want to have a noise texture, and we want to plug the color into the offset. Now you can see something's happening, not as much resolution, and you can see it's horrible. So let's turn down the scale, and we can see our curve looks okayish, but it is offsetted. So why is that? Because the noise texture has values from 1 to 0 in the Y, in the X and the Z axis. So it offsets it 0.5 in every axis. We can reset this by grabbing a vector math and setting it to subtract, and on every axis 0.5. So now it's in the middle again. So you can control the strength by a scale node with a scale node like this. And I want to have the scale a little bit down, something like this. Now we want to have branches on this thing. We need a little bit of room here. So we want to convert this curve to points. We can do this by going into the curve submenu, and here is hopefully the curves to points node. Yes. And we want to have a bunch of points, and then we want to instance on those points, and we want to instance another curve primitive, another primitive curve line, like this. But now they're all facing upwards. We don't want this. We want to have them sidewards and around. So we need an align Euler to vector node. And I want them all to be aligned on the x-axis. X or y, it's irrelevant, but not on the z. Now I want to rotate them around the z randomly. So for rotating it, we can go into the utilities, and here is the rotate Euler node. And we can use this, and now we can grab here the z-axis and we can change it randomly. We can do this by grabbing a combine xyz node, so we can split our vector channels like this, and then we can grab a random value node like this, and we can plug it into the z-axis. Now of course we have to make this value bigger. And now we have basically our branches. Now, of course, our center trunk is gone, so we have to convert it to a mesh. How can we do this? There's a basic node for this, so curve to mesh node, and I plug it in here, and I will join it back in here in the end, like this. And now we need also have a profile curve for this center, so I will use a curve circle, not like this, but like this. And that's obviously a little bit too big, and I will lower the resolution, maybe something like this. And we now want to have this getting smaller the more we are towards the top, and we need a node for this, and there is luckily a node for this. It is the spline parameter node. So this node outputs us a value from 0 to 1 from the length of your curve, and we can plug the factor into the radius. That's not possible, but we can use a set curve radius before the curve to mesh node, and we can plug the factor into the radius. And now it's opposite, so we can grab a color ramp and we can flip this around, and now we have a nice trunk. And we can do a similar thing with the scaling of our branches, because we want to have our branches bigger on the bottom and smaller on the top. So we basically need the scale here to be bigger on the bottom and smaller on the top. And we can't use the factor on this scale because the spline parameter is a field node and it doesn't contain information. It's just an indicator for geometry nodes. So if we will use our spline parameter here on the bottom, it will use the spline parameter from the geometry that is used above. So from our points, that doesn't even make sense. So we need to capture our spline parameter on this trunk curve. So we need to have a capture attributes node in here, and now we can use the factor. And now we have captured this and can use it on the scale. So we of course need to change this here so that it works. And of course we need to also flip this here around like this. And now this looks already really cool. We of course can at any time make this amount bigger, but for now, because of performance, we don't want to have this much of them. And now we want to have smaller branches on those branches. And we basically do the same thing. We will use our branches here and we want to instance on them. And now we want to turn our branches into a mesh. So we will grab in the curve submenu again the curve to mesh node, and we want to use a profile curve, curve circle like this, and with the resolution of 10 again, and of course a little bit smaller. And now we want to have them smaller at the tip, of course. So we will grab our set curve radius node again and grab our spline parameter node again and we will swap our directions with a color ramp. So I think we don't need displacements on those branches because you don't see it in the end because of all those needles. But you can do this, of course. You can do it the same way as we did with the branch, with the trunk, but I think you won't see in the end. But now we want to have smaller branches. How can we do this? For this, we can distribute points on our new branches like this, and we can use our viewer here to view this. And then of course we want to instance also on those points like we did before, and we want to use a mesh line. We want to have a bunch of more points, and let's realize the instances before so we don't go into trouble. And we want to use the rotation onto our rotation, and this looks like a mess, and this is okay. So we have to change the length of our small branches here, and let's watch it with the rest. It looks like this. So let's clean up this mess a little bit, and we can do this with an align Euler to vector node. It's in the utilities, and we can set it to X or Y. It's irrelevant. I will use Y, and I will lower the value a little bit to give it a little bit of randomness. And then after this, I will use the Z axis to bend them a little bit to the ground like this, maybe even a little bit further. And this looks now like a real tree. And of course, we have to convert them also to a mesh. So let's use our setup again, like this, and this also. Oh, we need our set curve to radius, like this, and our radius should be a little bit smaller than before. And this is now our branch system and trunk trisman, or trunk system of our Christmas tree. Now we need the needles, and this is fairly simple. We just have to grab our two things here, the two branches, and we need to join them together. And then we want to distribute points on them. And of course, we need to also realize our instances here. And we don't need 10 of a resolution. We need 3 on the needles. And then we can distribute a bunch of points. And we can instance on those points as before with a curve line. And those are now our needles, like this. And we need to plug the rotation to the rotation, and we can leave it by this for now. Change the Z, and these are now our needles. We can join them in with the rest, and of course we also have to do the whole thing with them than we did with the rest. So we have to convert them also to a mesh, like this, and set the curve radius. Of course, we're doing the same thing as before, so use the curve, the spline parameter, and we want to change the radius, maybe something like this. And then we can make a bunch more of them. And then I see here it's a little bit strange. They have to be randomized a little bit. So let's change that. For this we can use a rotate Euler, and we can use a randomize node, a random value node, set it to vector, and we can plug it into the rotate by, and maybe minus 0.5 and 0.5. And now they should be randomized. And you have now a wonderful Christmas tree. It's looking a little bit weird, but this is because we need more branches. So where were they? Here, maybe 200. And now we have a nice Christmas tree. It's a little bit laggy. And this, of course, we have a bunch of needles. We only need them when we render the scene. And for now, we will leave the amount very low. Now we want to have a fairy light around our Christmas tree. How can we do this? We can use our branches here again, and we can use where is it? A convex hull. So this is just a plastic bag that gets around it, and then we can wrap a curve primitive, a curve spiral around this, and we can do this by using an geometry proximity node. With this we can extract the position of our plastic bag that we wrapped around our Christmas tree, and we can set a new position for our curve spiral, and this should be the position of our new position from our plastic bag. We can view this. Yes, instances get ignored. That's all right. You have to, of course, change the height. Maybe something like this. And we have a little bit jagged edges, and this because we can change the type of our curve. Set the spline type to NURBS, and now we don't have that much jagged edges, and you can lower the resolution of our curve, something like this. And we can join this back in with the rest. And how does it look like? It looks great, but of course it's only a curve. So let's convert it to a mesh, and let's use our curved circle again, the best friend for today's episode. Here is our fairy light, and we want to distribute, of course, little balls, little lights on our fairy light. So we can turn our curve to points. We want to instance on those points. It's a little bit messy here. Sorry for this. And we want to instance a mesh primitive, an icosphere. So this will be our ball, and we can join this back in also. And those are a little bit big. Maybe 0.1. Yes, this is cool, but we want to have more points, more balls, sorry. Maybe something like this. I want to have our balls shaded smooth, so I go into the mesh submenu and grab the set shade smooth node, and this should be all right. Maybe it's a little bit too big, so we can grab a transform node, transform, I quickly search it, and I will wrap this a little bit more onto the middle, maybe like this. So let's move on with our candles. For this, I first have to model, of course, one. So let's create shortly a candle, maybe something like this. And then we need, of course, an icosphere. And with proportional editing, I will make it to a flame. I will shade it smooth. And I will make it so that it has two materials. I assign this to there. And the second material should be the light. And now we can use this candle on our tree. How can we do this? We can grab our branches. Where are they? They are here. And we can realize them like this. And now we need to trim them. So we have only the outer points of them like this, because we only want to have candles on the outside. And then with the value, we can define where our candles are sitting. Now we want to instance on points, and we want to instance our candle, which is a little bit smaller. And of course we want to have it at 1. Maybe something like this. And they can be a little bit bigger. But we don't want to have this much candles. So how can we decimate the amount of candles? We can use a delete the geometry node, delete geometry. And we can use a selection for this, a random value node set to Boolean. And now we can define how much candles we want to have. And we can also change the seed. I like this one. And now we can join this back in with all the rest. And now we can see they are still a little bit big. So let's turn this to 0.13 and we can turn them a little bit onto the inside like this. And maybe we also want to have a little bit more like this. This should be fine. But now we need to texture the whole thing. And we can do this by using a set material node on our trunk. So we will begin with our trunk. And I want to go to cycles, set the render device to GPU. And I of course want to use a normal HDRI. And for the trunk I want to have a material that's of course called trunk. And I want to use it on the trunk. And it should be brownish and relatively dark. And the same with the branches and the smaller branches. And of course they should be also rough and not that specular. Maybe something like this. And then for the needles, I want to have, those are the candles. For the needles, I want to have a needle material. I don't know if this is a right pronunciation, but they should be green. And of course we need to use the needle material. That's a very ugly green. Maybe something like this. Let's use a little bit more needles. Oh, those were a little much, but it looks great. So this is something maybe the final render should have. This much needles, but for this tutorial maybe 1000 are enough. Oh, it calculates a while. So let's move on with our candle. We have here an extra material that I made. So this has to be subsurface scattering, and our emission should be way higher, maybe something like 5. And then for our fairy lights, we want to use of course also materials. So for our balls, we want to set a material that we have to create. So I'll just call it balls. And let's use it here. And on those balls, we want to have, of course, emission because they are lights. And we want to have a layer weight node that controls the amount of emission. They should be transmissive. And we want to have the facing, and I want to flip the whole thing around like this. And now I want to have a random color for every ball. How can we do this? We need to search for the object info, and here we have a randomness, and we can use a color ramp, and then we can use it for the emission color. So I want to have blue balls, but I also want to have yellow balls, and I want to have also purple balls, something like this. And this is basically our whole Christmas tree. At the end, let's bump up our needle amount, and let's hope Blender doesn't crash. So this is our final Christmas tree. I hope you enjoyed the last episode of our Geometry Nodes course, and thank you all for watching. If you want to have great materials for your project, I have a free material pack and an advanced version of this material pack on my Gumroad shop. If you want to have great and easy to use materials for your professional projects, you can use those materials. As said, there's also a free version of this. And if you want to have help or you want to chat, you can join our Discord server. And other than that, have a great Christmas time in 2 days. Thank you and hopefully see you later. Bye.